Welcome to Marriage Now What? We have the great Pastor Dale today with us. Pastor Dale, one of the things that has always been spoke about is divorce. Get married, don't get divorced. And so then a lot of people say, well, then I just won't get married, because if God hates divorce, I just won't get married. And then if I break up with that person or whatever, it doesn't matter because I'm not getting a divorce. And there's been a lot of harsh context around divorce. You can't be in the ministry, or you're unfit anymore, or the problem was you, or, there's so many different dynamics to the word divorce, and none very encouraging, and I've never heard a pastor say or condone divorce. I always hear a pastor will say, we love the person, we don't love divorce, or, stuff like that, because of all the drama that goes behind divorce and stuff like that. But I've heard from personal experience, my mother went to a counseling class, and not to drag her, stuff through the mud, but she came home, and the meeting with you was, she says, I was delighted and surprised. She said, I went into the meeting with Pastor Dell, tell him about my marriage situation, and he said that he didn't feel like, based on what she was saying, that it was, a marriage or fit, to be in, that title, and that you allowed her, or I don't know exactly, because it was a while ago, but basically would say, I could see that you could apply divorce here, or something to that regards. Again, I'm not trying to bring out, exactly what that scenario was. I don't exactly know what all of the scenario was of why she wanted to get divorced or not. But so in your view, what do you think about marriage? What do you think about divorce? What's kind of your thought when you read the Bible about this?
Well, what you started with, there's a lot of hurt been put upon people that have gone through divorce. And, you go into any church congregation and you ask how many of you have been directly involved in a divorce sometime in your life, and ask them to raise their hands. You're going to have, 40% of your congregation at least probably raise their hand. So if if you don't have scriptural, hope to give these people, that's, you're ostracizing 40%, sometimes 50% of your congregation. And of course, in my life, I've never divorced. That doesn't make me great. It's just a fact. But my oldest son has, and I've got to see that a divorce up close and personal, and all the trauma and the hurt and that goes with it. And it's like an octopus with tentacles reaching in every direction. There's a lot of people gets hurt. People have a tendency to choose sides without even hearing both sides, But I think marriage, from a biblical standpoint, we need to bring the word covenant in. It's a covenant between two people. It's a blood covenant, and God desires companionship with a marriage, but marriage is never supposed to be, and God didn't design it to be, a prison sentence, something that you have to serve. And I'm not saying just divorce people at a whim. People, again, I found out, pastoring 27 years, people are going to do what they want to do, regardless of what the Bible says. Most people don't allow the Bible to get in the way of what they believe. You know what I'm saying? That's just sad. That's the sad truth. When it comes down to them, their feelings, their pain, their money, their hurts, they just make a decision and go with it. And we hate to see anybody divorce, and but that's just the truth of it. And a lot of people, they take, just portions of the Bible. They'll take what Jesus said about the married and divorce, and, as they say, letters in red, and they'll give more credence to that, but they'll limit themselves there, where the Apostle Paul had more to say about marriage under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit. And he actually says, if an unbeliever desires to depart, let them depart. That's divorce. He's saying let them depart. You can't make somebody stay married. You can't make somebody love you. You can't make somebody stay in covenant with you. And to me, what's the purpose of having a title or a marriage license stuck in a file somewhere, and you run around and call yourself married, but you're not in covenant? You don't have any of the fruits of a marriage. You can say, I guess, if it makes you feel better, to the legalistic Christian, well, at least I'm not divorced, But living in hell every day of your life just to say that you're married, particularly where there's physical abuse. And sometimes I'm not discounting or marginalizing mental abuse, but man, I've had women come and just say, they were being physically beaten, shoved on, pushed regularly. It's just common sense to get away from that. And the Bible doesn't teach anything about separation. It doesn't use that type of terminology or anything that we use. Well, they're not divorced; they're just separated. It's kind of the same thing, not from a legal standpoint, but they're still separated. They're divorced. That's what divorce is. So I just think, I remember my mother and father-in-law when I first started dating my wife, and they had been in a particular, I won't call it a denomination, all their lives, raised in one, denomination. And but when we started dating and they found out my background, they were open to go to where I went to church, and which was kind of unusual for those folks to come to a Pentecostal church, where I went at that time. And I was trying to figure out why such all of a sudden openness to attend, to find another church basically, or at least go to church with me. And so at this particular church, he had been voted in as the Sunday school superintendent for the church. Just almost 100% vote, voted him in. And he was serving in that capacity, doing a great job, and had done it for several months. And then as the congregation got to know more and the leaders know more about him, they found out that he was married to his wife, my mother-in-law, who had been married previously and had a child, which is my wife by her previous marriage. And boy, when they found that out, they stripped him of his title and of that position. And he had never been married before, hadn't done anything, loved God, served God. And there, because of this word divorce, and it was on her part, but because he was married, they said, they used the term, well, she's got two living husbands. And, church used to love to throw that term around. Well, they have two living husbands, And she wasn't legal to remarry because, her husband wasn't dead. And it just so wounded him, but it more wounded my mother-in-law because she felt the blame. She felt the guilt and the shame. In other words, her husband now is suffering because of a 20-year-old decision, that she made 20 years ago. And now, is trailed her all this time, and now she's, and it just made her feel less than, like a second-class Christian. God hates divorce, but he doesn't hate the person. And what God's saying to that, Malachi, is God, because of the pain it causes people. But it's got nothing to do with some prohibiting those type people from serving in, the house of God. The pastor that I went to and told that I was called to preach in, this would have been in 1986, March of 86. I met with my pastor on a Wednesday night after church, and I told him that I was called to preach. That pastor could never be ordained in that denomination. Never. Same reason. He had been married, had a kid with his first wife, divorced. Now, this guy wasn't even born again when all this occurred. So then years goes by, he gets born again, meets a woman, she's a born-again Christian, they marry, and then apparently God didn't know he'd been divorced because God called him into the ministry. God called him to preach. So he enters into the ministry and the training and preparation, but they held that against him. And he was prohibited from ever being an ordained minister. He could be a licensed minister, which is to me kind of a joke. But, don't preach like an ordained minister. Just, I don't understand all that. But this guy lived every day of his ministry life. He was a great man. But that's how ridiculous this has gotten, in the past. I don't think it's as bad as it used to be. I think it's getting better. But this was held over him, and the same thing was said to him. You have two living wives. You still have your first wife. She's not dead, so you're still bound to her. Paul didn't teach that. In 1 Corinthians 7, he said, if that unbelieving person, if they desire to depart, let them depart, because God desires peace. God equates peace higher than marriage in this case. In other words, if you're sitting there and you got two people that are warring at each other, screaming, fighting, throwing dishes every day, God don't want you living in that kind of deal, and he sure don't want the kids growing up in that kind of environment. God desires peace. But if an unbeliever desires to depart, not to serve your God, not to walk in harmony, how can two walk together except they agree? Then God says let them go. And it's your obligation to let them go. I mean, I've pastored people where I had this lady when I pastored in Sparks, and she's just a precious person, married. They just showed up at church. They were already in covenant, married or whatever, but their marriage was in big time trouble. They were having a lot of problems. And this was a case where this guy was shoving on her. He would push her down, shove her up against the wall, push on her, and use his, strength to, demonstrate his anger and all this kind of deal. And she was terrified of this guy. And of course, I'm my heart's broken for all this. I'm not, saying, hey, yeah. But later on, he got him. He got in an affair with another woman. He wanted a divorce. She fought it, every inch of the way. And but I remember when the divorce was final. Sometimes it's 30, 45 days, 60 days, depending. And I remember my wife come and told me, because she was talking with this woman almost every day, and she said, the divorce is, is final for her. And I said, well, this is both the best and the worst day of her life. It's really going to turn out to be the best day for her, but all she thinks it's the worst right now because of what she's feeling and experiencing. And just like her, that Christian lady was a victim of divorce. She didn't, nobody's perfect on both sides on any kind of situation or marriage as far as their behavior, but she really wanted, even in spite of what had gone, to stay married. And a lot of that guilt is put on Christians, not by God and not by the Bible, but it is because of the pressure not to be that Christian that wears that label, I'm a divorcee. Right. That I've been divorced, and like it somehow has marred you for life, and you're unfit for the kingdom, you're unfit to be in leadership, or you can't hold positions of authority, or just whatever. So anyway, but that's just some of the hurt. I mean, I can just go on, but it's so sad, and we need to let divorced people know that there is no second class Christians. And divorce is a sin, like a lot of things are a sin. And I'm not minimized. I'm not marginalized. I'm not saying it's not a big deal, because it hurts people. I mean, like I said, I've watched my son go through it, and the hurt he experienced, my former daughter-in-law, the hurt that she went through, and then the parents. I mean, I had people leave my church because my son got divorced. I had people just say and do crazy things. I had other pastors that were in my network left my network and no longer associated with me because my son went through a divorce, and as he was going through the divorce, I allowed him to play the drums at the church. And I remember I had a pastor in one town, I started naming, I won't, but I met with him and his wife at their request, and she said, well, I don't think you should let your son play the drums because he's going through a divorce. I said, what's that got to do, with anything? He's not up teaching people. He's not up preaching. He's not, if I don't have him playing, I'm going to hire a drummer. So I said, I'm going to let him play the drums.
And he's a good drummer.
Yeah, he's a great drummer. I mean, and he's going through a tough time. Why would you not want to be in the house of God and be surrounded around people that say they love him and stuff like that? And she said, well, I just don't trust your leadership. And I said, well, God does, because I'm the pastor and you're not. So, but they left. They didn't want to be connected with me anymore, and it was all because of divorce. And it wasn't even me. I didn't, and I had so many people at my former church to get upset with me, to say things or disassociate with me. And I may sound like a wounded person, but we're on the topic, so I'm just saying what people go through, and particularly people in church and in ministry. And I had just people just say, I had people I had a prayer cabin where I lived that was back in the woods, and you've been there and familiar with it. But when my son went through a divorce, somebody normally has to leave the house. I mean, you're already not getting along. You're both not going to stay there. So he let his wife at that time, stay at the house, and he left. And so so he knows I have the cabin, a little 1-bedroom cabin, kitchen and all that stuff. And he said, Dad, can I live in the cabin? And I said, sure, son. I mean, what am I going to do? Say sleep under the bridge? And I had people upset because I allowed my son to live in the prayer cabin. Well, first off, it's my cabin. I let anybody live where I want to. You know what I'm saying? It's just, but I had people so upset because like that, he's not supposed to. I mean, what are you supposed to do with divorced people? What? It's just ridiculous. It's frustrating. It's sad that we don't read the Bible better than that.
Well, that's basically what we're saying is people have read the Bible. They've created beliefs out of what they've read out of the Bible. And if you take when this was written, the Bible, Jews were divorcing women all the time. And the first thing is that, because you talked about covenant, they would make a covenant with the parents. Parents would make covenant or stuff like that. Remember the story where he goes, sends the servant, says, go back and find my son a wife.
That's right.
He didn't say, find the wife that my son loves or the woman who loves my son. He said, basically, go purchase a woman for marriage for my son. So women were assets, commodities, it wasn't based out of love. So they enter into this covenant parent to parent, or man to parent or stuff like that. It wasn't man to woman. And then man had the right almost for anything.
Yeah, women had no right to divorce. A woman could not divorce a man.
Right.
If he beat her down physically, she could not divorce him. And a lot of people don't realize that. They try to put the American culture, it don't fit. It doesn't compute. That's why we got the woman at the well called a harlot and a whore and a terrible woman because she'd been married 5 times. Well, what they don't know, apparently, is that woman never divorced anybody. She was put away 5 different times by her husband.
Different husbands.
And then in the latter portion, when Jesus encounters her, she's living with the 6th one, that Jesus did say, the one you're living with is not yours. He wasn't condemning her with that. He was just saying, I'm a prophet and I know about all your past, and I still love you. That's what he was saying. The people that read it through legalistic eyes is like he's bashing her. He's calling her a promiscuous woman. You got to understand, if she, like that woman, if she'd been divorced 5 times by men who, like you said, had the right to walk up and say, I divorce thee. And
it was that easy.
It was that easy. Actually, from what I understand, they could say it 3 times, and that was illegal. Wow. And for frivolous things. And Jesus rebuked them for that. Moses talked about that. And so God's not saying it's just not a big deal, but you got to understand, during the Bible times when it was written, the women had no rights to divorce, and they had no rights at all, really. And you got to understand, they couldn't even sit on the same side of the sanctuary as men. They had their own place that they were relegated to sit. And it wasn't a position of honor. And that's why you see some of the confusion sometimes where a woman maybe didn't know all the procedures. She'd holler at her husband, what did he mean by that? And he would say, be quiet and let women learn at home. But that doesn't compute or fit into our culture, and we're not changing the Bible to make it fit. You just got to read the Bible in context. And when Paul's giving all the marriage advice and admonishing people not to marry and stay single and all that he's doing in 1 Corinthians, because the context was the church was under physical persecution, being driven out and killed and pursued, and it was just not a great time to be, caught up in marriage concerns and providing for a family. There was a crisis going on, and that's why Paul addressed that marriage like that, but not because he was saying this is how I feel about marriage.
That's interesting. Yeah, I've never heard that before. So basically he's saying because of this time that we're in of doom and gloom.
That's right.
That you have to provide for yourself, but you have to provide for her, and so in that should you get married? And that's what I'm saying. I mean, I think it's so great. I don't know how many other stories there are about divorce in the Bible, but definitely the one with the woman at the well where Jesus is talking to her. He never said, God is mad at you because you got a divorce.
Right.
Like you said, she was put away every time, not her leaving the husband, and we've talked about being probably because she was beautiful is why she got married so many times, and probably why she got put away so many times was because she was barren.
That's right. She couldn't have a child.
Right. So nothing of her own accord, and she gets divorced. And she gets divorced.
That's right.
And she gets divorced.
And that's like a video picture to me, though. In other words, I'm not saying everybody. I'm not saying like we're the smartest Bible folks around. But as a broad brushstroke, I'm telling you, the average Christian, if you mention the woman at the well, first thing they think about is a harlot, promiscuous, sinful, adultery woman. You got to remember that in the Bible, that if you committed adultery and you were caught, you were stoned to death.
We see that example
with Jesus and with Joseph and Mary.
Right.
That's why Joseph desired to divorce Mary. That's what it means, put her away privately. That means divorce her. In the Jewish culture, he was a spouse to her, which was a legal contract, just like our being married. Even though they had consummated the marriage with physical relations, yet for him to get out of that, he had to divorce her. He had to put her away. And Joseph said, I'm going to put her away private. Now, when Mary comes to him and tells him I'm pregnant, he didn't believe a word of it. He believed that she had slept with another man and gotten pregnant. And so he's going to divorce her. You know, we don't even imagine, it's hard to imagine the pain that she probably experienced, because this was a God thing in her life, and the closest person to her on the earth didn't believe her. Man, that's got to hurt. And so he's going to divorce her privately, lest she be stoned to death. He didn't want her to be executed, but he also didn't want to be married to her. And, of course, God sent Gabriel privately to Joseph to clear all that up for him. And I always joke about wanting to check out the DVD when I get to heaven about Joseph's apology to Mary. You know, like, honey, I'll never doubt you again. You know, I'll believe anything you tell me. But that woman.
Well, when she has angels coming to confirm.
Yeah. But that woman at the well. So here's a woman. So it can't be like the church has taught that she's an adulterous woman, because she would have already been executed, and that would have been the end of her. So here she is. She gets married. She can't divorce any man on her own, so she gets divorced. She's that victim of divorce. Again, it is my belief. I mean, you know, why marry an ugly woman? You know what I'm saying? I mean, here she got to be desirable. Men want her. So a second husband marries her, goes into covenant with her. Doesn't say how long, then he divorces her. Third man, fourth man, fifth man marries this woman, and then he divorces her. In the Jewish culture, it is so important to have children. And in that culture, it was perceived that if you could not have a child, then you were considered barren, but you were considered cursed by God. And so to keep their name going, they would have to marry a woman that could bear them a son to keep the line going. Very important to the Jewish culture. So to me, it's clear. She just was barren. And it's one thing to be divorced because you did something, okay? It's another thing to be divorced and you did nothing, and you were just rejected, because that's the real thing behind divorces. They have to deal with that feeling or the spirit, if you want to call it that, of rejection. They've been, somebody's rejected them in a big way, and so now there's no food stamps, there's no welfare system for her. She's been married 5 times. The Bible doesn't give us the details, but you got to be smart enough this is a real deal. So she's living with a man. Now let me tell you what the Bible don't say. It don't say she was having sex with a man. It don't say she was sleeping with a man. It don't say she was having intercourse with a man. It just says she was living with a man. Now if you want to tell everybody that lives with somebody's having sex, then there you go. That's your dirty mind. But Jesus said the man you're living with is not your own. So maybe she's, what about this? Maybe she's living with that guy just to have 3 squares and a roof over her head. Maybe she's just trying to survive because what she's gone through. And there Jesus encounters this woman at the well, and she goes there, sure, at noonday, because she's been divorced 5 times, and she knows that under the Jewish culture, the way the other women view her, they're not friendly to her probably. And so, but Jesus was. And he's not condemning her when he says the man you have now is not your own. He's just saying, I'm a prophet and I know everything about you and I still love you. How about that? And I think it's pretty cool that Jesus was the seventh man, the complete. And, and that's who that woman was. And we got a lot of people out here that's divorced, gone through divorce, that's in terrible situations where they're kind of like that woman. They're trapped. They didn't do anything, but now they're suffering because of it. Their husband, was a great provider. All of a sudden, he gets on drugs. He does this or that. He's not providing anymore. Now, what am I going to do with my kids? How am I going to provide? They come and took my car. What am I,
Well, and even the story of the woman who got caught in adultery, we don't know her backstory. Mm-mm. How many times was she put away? Was she looking for a man to help support and provide for her?
That's right.
I have Mexican people, friends, who they tell me stories all the time of the women who are left in Mexico. If the man comes to America and does not keep that support going, basically she's got to go somewhere else, because basically she can't make enough money in Mexico to provide for the family or stuff like that. So she immediately has to find another situation that works for her to survive. Yeah. And I don't think we realize that. We're like, oh, well, a woman can get a job or should get a job, or, we put so much more pressure on. But the behaviors behind the stories that we see, I think we got to give grace to them. Yeah. I mean, these are hard situations, and I think we can't just have blanket statements of, well, your son's a man, he can get his own place to live. Right. Your son, as good as he is at being able to provide for his own place and for, his wife, they're going through a situation, still needs grace, still needs a house, still needs help, still needs love. I think we just demolish people's value by the situations that we're going in. And that's, I think, one of the things that was the greatest highlight for my mom is she came back and she's like happy. And I'm like, what are you so happy about? And I think it was the freedom of, I'm valued. I'm an individual. I can finally, instead of the man always putting the woman away, the woman could say, no, right, you're not doing good unto me. You're not doing good unto us, or stuff like that. Giving power to the women, Yeah. I don't know all of the counseling aspect, but seems like more women, want to keep the marriage more than men. So have we kind of still stayed in this wanting to put women away? I mean, like, for me as a man, I think, am I even today creating the best marriage that I could be creating, or am I behind? Is there a greater thing that I could be creating, or am I putting pressure on my wife? Do this, do that, or I'm going to put you away. Basically, like that belief for that man. You said in Jewish culture, it's very important for him to have that name to be carried on.
That's right.
So that's a thought. Yes, it's a tradition. Yeah, right. I mean, but really that's just a belief. And I wonder how many times as men do we have this belief or expectation of our wife, and it's important to us, but should it be important enough that belief overrides the value of that woman, and we put her away or do something wrong?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we're talking about divorce, and we're talking about divorced people and what they experience. And I value marriage so much. I'm coming up in July, it'll be 40 years of marriage.
Awesome.
And so, I mean, to me, it's other, than me getting born again. It really is, the greatest thing that ever happened to me. And I'm closer, and as they say, more in love with my wife today than I was when we got married 40 years ago. And that's just the truth. And I'm not going to apologize for that, because that's not everybody's story, but that's my experience. My grown kids would say to us, to me and their mom, because they would get, once they got out and began to date and even got married, they would say, well, they'd come back to us, and when they would be going through difficult things in their marriage, and I remember they've told me this several times, well, y'all just not normal. In other words, just an unreal view. I mean, there's times, I can't even remember the last time that we had an argument. I mean, after 40 years, you should kind of have it figured out. You know what I'm saying? I mean, we'll go a year and never even disagree on. I mean, the Bible says something about becoming one.
Right.
And so I think that's just a fruit of it. I guess as a pastor, and of course, this is to be probably the number one thing I've ever counseled people about is their marriages. And most of the time it's women coming in. Now the men come too, but not as often as the women. And of course, you got to be able to talk to both of them. But and I've seen God, heal so many marriages because everybody comes into marriage with their own background, their own thoughts, their own ideals, what they think marriage is, and they've got that from their own experience or lack thereof, and from Hollywood and from everything else. And a lot of times the stark reality of that is that's not the way it is. And people come into marriage and go, well, marriage is a 50-50. And it's not 50-50. It's you die to yourself and you live for the other person. Of course, if they're doing that, then you got a wonderful marriage, because what kills any marriage is selfishness. If one person decides to be selfish over any area of that marriage, you got problems.
Well, and I've said that to my wife. I said, the only time we argue is if one of us is being selfish.
That's right.
And I actually think now the only reason we argue is because two people being selfish. Because one person can be selfish and the other one be forgiving, and it'd be okay.
And it's still not be an argument.
Right.
That's right.
But when two people become selfish
at the same time,
right, it's on. Yeah. Like last night, it was funny because you're like, we hardly ever fight. And I was thinking the same thing. I'm like, man, we haven't fought for a long time. And last night, kids have been home. They're going to be home for 2 weeks. And the drama,
the pressure's building.
Right. And so it seemed heated with my wife's side of the story, and I was like, okay, let's not, what can we do to, and that's the case. I mean, she was getting anxious and uptight, and I'm like, I'm not going to get anxious, uptight, we worked through it smoothly. So one, can be selfish, two, drama.
Yeah. And of course, the Bible, when you read about relationship between husband and wife and all that, you probably remember years ago it's one of the main messages I remember, because I remember that Sunday when I walked out into the vestibule area, the lobby area, there was a long, and I had been in the sanctuary a long time talking to people, and when I went out there, there was still a long line of women, all women in line to get the CD of that. I
remember that day. Yeah.
And I was teaching on men, the masculinity aspect of men, and men in marriage, and just being men of God, and and for some reason that just struck such a chord with those women. I mean, I had grandmothers buying it for young men in their families, and I just went through those things, and the Bible does put the lion's share of responsibility. That's what it is, being responsible. When God came in the garden, he didn't say, Adam and Eve, where art thou? He said, Adam, where are you? It wasn't that he was ignoring Eve or mad at her, but that's where the headship came. The man was created first. And so God does have that order and that headship, and it's based on responsibility, but it's not, a husband is superior to his wife, or, I'm the boss, your wife is by your side, there's a helpmate. And some people look at that like, well, that's a degrading term. Well, if it is, the Holy Spirit's called the exact same words. He's our helper, our helpmate. So it's not degrading to be the helper, to be the helpmate. You're just helping them fulfill what God's called them to do. And same thing with the husband. And a lot of husbands, there's hardly a husband I've ever talked to that did not know the verse, wife, submit yourself to your husband. Right. And many times that gets quoted in a marriage confrontation.
Oh, yeah.
To the harm of the wife. But it also says the next verse, and, husbands, and it says submit one to another. So it tells the husband to submit too. But most of the time that verse is not known as well as the preceding verse.
My mind is so small I can only remember one verse. Which one do you pick?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. But most, a lot of women have had that verse when the marriage is going through tough times, thrown at them. You're supposed to submit to me. You're not a submissive wife.
I've done it a million times in my life. Million times.
But it's just because of lack of understanding. And a lot of times because that's what's been preached from the pulpit to us men. Right. We've been told that's the way it is. I'm the boss. By God, you do what I say, or you're not a good wife. And, most women want to be that great wife. They do. That's why they get married. But if you, it's been on my heart a lot lately. But I tell people, if I got up today and everything as I confront, talk to people, meet people today, whatever, or even my wife. In other words, if I get up today and I woke up and I need people to love me for me to be okay, then I'm not going to be okay today, because I can only be as good as they do me, allow me to be. But if I get up to love somebody, then I'm going to be okay. Now, that doesn't mean I don't desire that, or what I'm saying, but it's like if you get saved just for your sake. In other words, if you got born again and you think it's all about you having a better life and that God's supposed to be with you and you're supposed to be able to have a good job, drive good, eat good, live good, and never have any problems, you're gonna be at the return counter with your Jesus. You're gonna say, "I got the wrong Jesus. I'd like to return him and get the one the preacher preached about." God never promised you that, and the Bible teaches in the New Testament, in the epistles, that we're to be for the praise of His glory. And so if my goal is to, I got married so my wife can serve me, so she can love me, so she can provide for me in all the ways that I want, then you can only be as good as she's doing. And you'll never be satisfied 100% with that, because the only love that's perfect is God's. And so that's why love never fails, because that's His love. But now our love fails. There's a limit to what we say. Well, people say, "Oh, I love you." Well, give me $1,000. Won't love you that much. You know what I'm saying?
Well, it's interesting because I know, like a helpmeet. We always use that term. Well, helpmeet for me for the longest time was do the dishes, clean the house. Help meet the responsibilities of the house, the kids. All of these things. It wasn't come in union and let's discuss how we should financially plan our week, our year, our month, how should we raise our kids, in grace and love? How should we, raise our kids, teaching them the Bible or school, or, what plan do we have? It's you do all these responsibilities to free me up from having to do them, and your help meeting, which that's what your purpose was on earth. God brought you to do these chores for me.
Yeah.
I'll just be honest, as little-minded as I was, that was my whole contents of marriage,
Yeah.
She's to help me do these chores so that we, can free me up to do what is real work, real business.
Yeah.
And so that's why now it's different. Like we monthly, like right now, the kids are out of school for 2 weeks. It was a surprise. Well, what are we going to do? Well, how are we going to do it? Well, what should we do? Well, what finances do we have?
Right.
It's a communication, not, just get it done. It's your responsibility. You make it happen. Don't bother me with it.
Yeah.
It's now, what are we, how do we need to handle this?
Yeah.
So our terminology's changed greatly, but the unfortunate part is both these things that you said, submit to me and, be a helpmeet, are two beliefs I had for a long time, which was not rewarding or cherishing to my wife at all.
Yeah. And to me, I don't know, it's not like I had went to a marriage course or anything before we got married. I got married July 12, 1980. And of course we had seen things in both of our lives, experience of watching our parents in their marriages, and there's no cut to my parents, but in other words, I saw things that I knew that I did not want in my marriage. I just didn't want it to be like that, and so I saw a lot of good things too, but I saw things I don't, I got to guard against this area here maybe. And I don't know, my heart's always been anything that I can do. I just never saw the clear-cut line, well, that's woman's work, it's man's work. And I just anything that I can do to take any kind of pressure or load off of her is, and I'm limited in some capacity to what I can do, but to me it's just an expression of love. I'm just trying to help. I'm just trying to do what I can do to lessen your load. She works too now in real estate, and I work. And last week I was in a home, helping this lady with her Medicare plan, and I had been in this home back in 2018, and they had called me back to help in another area and change the plan and wanted more benefits, and I was there doing that. But I remembered, and I got a vivid view of it again. But this guy just spoke so harshly to his wife. He did. I remember feeling bad for her in 2018 when I was sitting in their home, hearing how he talked to her. And I don't mean he was calling her names or anything, but he talked to her as if she was stupid. It was just so clear, and it just made you embarrassed, feel bad. And I was in there last week, same way. And my heart was so broke for that woman. You could tell that woman was so beat down. And that's when I addressed one of the things I talked to men about, how that they talk to their wife. If that husband talked to other men the way he talks to his wife, he wouldn't have any front teeth because somebody would be knocked them out for him. You know what I'm saying? But he talked to their wife, and I don't know if they just don't get it. They, what I said is women are like a fine crystal goblet. If you mishandle that, you're going to break it. You got to handle it different. Men are like thermoses. You can drop them, kick them, run over with the truck, and you're still going to have good coffee in there. You know what I'm saying? It's going to be okay. And that's not got anything to do with the value of one or the other people. It's just our words and how we. And sometimes it's not even the words, but the tone and the way to love and protect children and women. And just speak to them differently, and don't speak to them harshly. And you might be under tremendous pressure, and you're trying to provide, and you got 1,000 things going on. And I've said this even to my son one time. He was riding with me in the truck, and his wife called, and man, he was kind of, because he didn't want to be interrupted. He was like, "What I'm doing is too important," And when he hung up, because he did it in my presence, I said, "Son, now listen, you can't talk to her like that. You're going to hurt her." "Well, all she wants to talk about is this and this. It don't matter." Well, it does to her, though. And if we lose that into marriage, it may not be important to you. She might be wanting to talk about the color of the drapes or something. But it's important to her. She wouldn't be on the phone with you. The fact your phone rang is this testimony. It's important to her. Because she knows you're out working. She knows you're out in the field and working or whatever. And but then for you to lambaste that and to marginalize it and say, this is frivolous, we'll talk about it when I get home, don't bother me. It just leaves her with that hurt, and you just keep pounding on something long enough, you can just beat the love right out of it. And I think men need to hear that, and just, it just helps to be with the Lord. It helps to remember that your wife belongs to a king. That's the king's daughter. And he likes you to treat her good, most men, I remember when you were dating, if you're in the presence of that girl's dad, you really wanted to be kind to her, and because he's watching, he's listening. And but if we remember that king's daughter, he's always watching, listening, not from a condemning way, but just love her. Like the Bible said, love. Husbands, love your wife as Christ loved the church. And gave himself up for it. So that's what he's saying, that you just lay your life down. Now if you don't want to do all that, then don't get married.
Right.
That's don't do it. But God said, if you're gonna, I guess I'll just end with this. The saddest thing to me is when people come sit in my office and they talk to me about marriage, and their whole concept of marriage is totally different than mine. And not that mine's perfect, but if a guy's been married 40 years, at least you're worth listening to. You got to have something to say to value. But in other words, just like you got a old jalopy that hardly no brakes, no shocks. The thing rides like a buckboard wagon, pulled by horses. But it's a vehicle, okay. And then you can drive up in a Cadillac, air conditioning and all the. But both of those things are vehicles. But one, and they both going to get you somewhere eventually. But one of them's going to get you there in a lot better condition, and you're going to enjoy the ride a lot better. And it's so sad to me to see people that are married say, "Well, at least we're married, we're not divorced." Yeah, but that marriage is beating you to death. I mean, you're not enjoying a day of it. That's not what God designed marriage to be. He said He called it a covenant of companionship. God wants you to be together. The power of that. I mean, when God made Eve for man, but she was taken out of man. If you read Genesis. And of course, you got to remember that before Eve was pulled out of the side of man, God had commanded the man to be fruitful and multiply. He had no way of doing it. That's why when he was looking around all the animals, he saw no helpmate suitable for him. Because in Adam's mind, he said, I'm trying to look and see how can I fulfill the command God gave me. The command God gave me was to be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth. Well, that's why when he saw, it wasn't that Adam's like, I'm lonely, I need a woman, I'm sad. That's ridiculous. This is before sin. Adam wasn't sad and lonely. When the Bible says it's not good for a man to be alone, it's not because he needs somebody to do the dishes or he's going to be sad. It's meant that he can't fulfill the mandate to be fruitful, to multiply, to replenish the earth, to subdue, and do all the things that God's called him to do that, and to me, I mean, I just, and I don't think even after 40 years of marriage, I've seen every little facet and aspect, and that I know 100% of everything about my wife. I mean, to me, I still see little things, that.
Well, even as she became a grandmother, you saw her now in a whole new light.
Absolutely, that's what I'm talking about.
And then 2 grandkids or a daughter, grandkid. Well, it's interesting that you brought that up because. It's almost like as men, we've lost that call of be fruitful and multiply. And we're like, oh, the woman, be fruitful and multiply. Be fruitful and multiply with the kids. Be fruitful and multiply at the house.
God's saying
I'll do the finances. You do the kids. And we almost miss the view of the value of the woman and multiplying with her, in relationship, in love, in understanding, in caring and nurturing and all of these things.
Yeah.
We miss such a large aspect of the greatness of what God's called us to.
Yeah, and I think it's cool that we kind of end in talking about this because we started out talking about divorce. Now we're talking about because this is what we won't have to talk about divorce if it's not happening.
Right.
If the marriage is healthy and and you got to have. I understand you got to have 2 committed people, and you got to have people that don't throw out the divorce word every time they have an argument. I'll just divorce your butt. I mean, because it shows you. I used to tell couples this. I mean, you listen to them talk, and maybe not figuratively. I'm not saying figuratively, but a lot of people. We used to have the old saying. From Cortez, and when he supposedly burned the ships at the beach so that his conquerors could not go back. To where they came from, that they had to accomplish, their mission. So he burned the ships. You have to do away with the escape hatch. You have to eliminate divorce from your thoughts and your vocabulary, and you can't keep a bed under the suitcase, that you can throw clothes in and go back to mom or go back to dad, and I'm saying husband or wife, and that makes it more of a committed thing. I'm not like. 90% in this or 70%, you make me mad, I'll divorce you, and I don't, and the thing I want everybody to know that has gone through a divorce is there's sin involved in that, and the Bible's clear on that, but you're forgiven. Divorce is not the unpardonable sin that the church, in some aspects, have made it the unforgivable sin, unpardonable, because that's why my father-in-law got put out of his Sunday school superintendent because his wife had gone through a divorce, and he had what they considered the unfortunate blessing to marry her. So he's being penalized because of her mistake. But so in other words, that pastor that was my pastor that I told I'm called to the ministry to, he had that held over him all of his life in that church denomination. So that denomination is telling you, we don't forgive you. You're not forgiven. This has not been erased or eradicated or thrown as far as the left is from the right or north from the south. Jesus didn't take away this sin. We kept it, and it's in your file. And we got this on you, so therefore we will never ordain you. To me, I wouldn't stay 5 seconds in a denomination that's doing that, because they're saying you're not forgiven. They're actually trying to get you to believe God's not forgiven you, that God holds that against you. Why would God call a man to preach that? I mean, probably I learned more under that one pastor probably any pastor I've ever had. I mean, he's just a great, great man of God, and it breaks my heart to think that he, would always have to go to me. In other words, he could never serve on state leadership positions in that denomination, much less national position. He could never hold a position of leadership because he can only be a licensed minister, and you have to be an ordained minister. Well, we won't ordain you because you've been married before.
Well, and we never saw that in Jewish tradition.
No.
Because men divorced women all the time, and they were still leaders.
And the Sanhedrin and all, right. Yeah, they didn't, yeah. So
for us to do that today, and is not right.
Yeah, and that's where you wonder sometimes how in the world did that, who started that?
Right.
How did you sell that to the church? I mean, how did we ever be so gullible to accept that as the way it is, and I don't know, the older I get, it's just frustrating to me. So I try to, temper my my thoughts and discipline myself of what I say publicly, and sometimes it's different than what I feel privately.
You've listened to some books of your tapes 20 years ago, and been like, I said that.
Yeah. Because I know where God's brought me, and I'm still learning and growing. But
why don't you close us out with your information? You've got a great book that you've written.
Well, it's, I don't know which camera we're going to. It probably doesn't matter, but Exposing Misheard in Church. God has really used this, not just because I have written it. It took me years to write it. It's not a very thick book, but I just expose things that I grew up hearing in church that are absolutely not in the Bible. They're not biblical. There was a time that I took them as doctrine because I was preached as doctrine. Examples: God is in control, so everything that happens, don't worry about it. God's in control. God's not in control. If God was in control, there'd be no murders, rapes, suicides, all that stuff going on. God's in charge. God hadn't lost his sovereign power, but he's not in control of our decisions, what we do, whether we're saved or lost. I mean, we still have a free will, and we need to understand that and stop blaming God for every tornado, hurricane, or anything that happens. Every time, just like the other day in Nashville, Tennessee, here come the preachers out, and God's judgment. He's trying to get our people, attention. People are saying, "I've already heard it already." That God's God sent this virus, trying to get the attention of the lost, and it's just, it not only is it ridiculous, it's blasphemous. But they can go to Amazon, and this book can be bought off of Amazon.com. They can go to Dell Young, DELLYOUNG.net, and they can get a copy there. They can go to Books A Million, to their website, Barnes and Nobles as well. They can still order those, and they can actually. What's cool, the way I do most books now is I just download them. So on Amazon, you can just download it for really cheap. And I learned in being a publisher that Amazon gets 90% of the money. but we wrote it just to get the gospel out and to get the news, and just so many people have said how freeing it has been to their life. I've had people to start serving God again. One man wrote me, he hadn't been in church in 14 years. And he read the book, and it just changed his life. He was able to release the anger that he felt toward God that was not founded. It wasn't true. But anyway. Exposing Myths Heard in Church by Dell Young. Thank you so much. Until next time.